Hi, Hive. So I'm here a little bit late. I'm sorry about that. Something unexpected came up. But here I am, and we are going to talk a little bit about Mudhouse Sabbath. So I know I just posted the reading schedule today. So first, I want to talk about how we're going to do the book study, and then we'll go into a little bit of the introduction. And so, Mudhouse Sabbath, written by Lauren Winner, it's a book about the life of spiritual discipline. And what it does is it takes a chapter, or there are several chapters in here, but what it will do with each chapter is it will explain a Jewish practice. For example, the first one that we'll do next week, or next week on Tuesday, will be the Sabbath, but it's the Jewish Shabbat. And then how can you take the Jewish principles of Shabbat as a Christian and infuse that? Or what can the Christian ideas of Sabbath and the Jewish principles of Shabbat, what can they do to speak to each other? So that's something we'll talk about next week. So anyway, we will meet here on the Facebook group at 4 o'clock, 4:30 today. Um, Hi, Cami. So we'll meet here at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we'll go over a different chapter. Sometimes there'll be something that you maybe could bring with you, or something that I'll suggest that you can do at home or explore further. So today we're going to talk about the introduction. Next week on Tuesday, we will talk about the first chapter, Shabbat or Sabbath. Then on Thursday, we'll talk about fitting food. Then the next week we'll do mourning and then hospitality. The next week will be prayer and body. The next one will be fasting and aging, and then candle lighting and weddings. And then on Holy Week, um, the last chapter is called Doorposts. So we'll do that on Tuesday of Holy Week, but then you'll actually get a little bit of homework that we can bring and kind of show each other either on a live video or by picture posts here and on Instagram. Because the very last chapter talks a lot about Jewish prayers at the door and how those ground you. So we might actually have a little DIY craft that we can do. So, anyway, on to the introduction. So this is simple today. I'm just going to read a couple things to you so that if you're just coming to the book, you know what it's about. I'm going to give you a few discussion questions, and then I will also post it in picture form here in a bit in the Facebook group. And you'll also be able to follow along with the questions on Instagram and Twitter if either of those are more of your social media preference. So, all right, so Mudhouse Sabbath. Lauren, who is an Episcopal priest, grew up as in an Orthodox Jewish home and converted. And what she says about the book is that this book is about the things I miss. It's about Sabbaths and weddings and burials and prayers, rituals Jews and Christians both observe, but also rituals we observe quite differently. It's about paths to the God of Israel that both Jews and Christians travel. It is, to be blunt, about spiritual practices that Jews do better. It is, to be blunter, about Christian practices that would be enriched, that would be thicker and more vibrant if we took a few lessons from Judaism. It's ultimately about places where Christians have some things to learn. And then she talks about how Jewish people do these things with more attention and wisdom, because action is what sits at the center of Judaism. And then one more quote. She says, "Indeed, Judaism suggests that the repeating of the practice is the best way to ensure that a doubter's faith will return." And I wonder if you're on here now, hi Cami and Catherine, if you have a favorite quote, if you're either watching this now or you're watching the recording later, if you want to write down something you liked from the introduction, a favorite quote that you have, and I'll share one more. It says, "All religions have spiritual practices. Buddhists burn sage and meditate. Muslims avail themselves of their prayer rugs. Christian tradition has developed a wealth of practices too. Fasting, almsgiving, vigil keeping, confessing, and meditating. True enough, Christians in America, especially Protestants in America, have not historically practiced those practices with much discipline. but that's beginning to change. In churches and homes everywhere, people are increasingly interested in doing Christianity, not just speaking or believing it. Here's the place where so-called Jewish-Christian relations become practical. If the church wants to grow in its attendance to and its doing of things for the God of Israel, we might want to take a few tips from the Jewish community. So with that, here are your questions for the week. That last thing about Jewish-Christian relations, one of the reasons we picked this book is that we're living in a time of rising anti-Semitism. And so what is it that we mean by Jewish-Christian relations? What could Jewish people and Christian people, what could those different communities learn from one another about worshiping the living God of Israel? Do you think that's possible for them to learn from one another? Why or why not? So that's the first question about the relations between Judaism and Christianity in those communities. What can we give one another? All right, the next question is, what is spiritual practice? And what are some of the practices that you observe? Do you practice them alone or with your family and friends? So the first question is about Jewish-Christian relations. The second is, what is a spiritual practice? Do you have some, and what do they mean to you? And do you do them alone or with friends? And you'll probably find that there are some things you do alone, and there are some things that you do in community, because some practices are meant to be done alone, and some are meant to be done in community. All right, here's the next one, and the final one. Some people report that adopting spiritual practices like daily prayer or regular fasting makes them feel prideful. How can one enter a life of spiritual discipline without the discipline creating feeling of self-satisfaction or self-righteousness? So basically, how can you take up spiritual practices without feeling self-righteous? So for those of you who maybe participated in an Ash Wednesday service, last night, the gospel reading that many people read was of Jesus talking about the right way to fast, or the right way to go about spiritual disciplines like fasting and almsgiving and prayer, which are the pillars of Lent. And Jesus said that if you make a big to-do of these things, that you're a hypocrite. That Jesus said that the right way to do fasting and prayer and almsgiving is not to be really showy about it. And so I think that some people react to that reading by saying, well, how the heck am I supposed to do it? So this week, think about, how the heck are you supposed to do it? And maybe we can learn from one another. Cami says, I like the quote about how we Christians have a bit to learn. Sometimes we tend to think we have it all figured out, like the Pharisees. Yes. That's one of the things that makes the Hive beautiful. And if you haven't met Hillary, you should look her up, Hillary Raining. She started the Hive, and one of her visions for the Hive is that we would be a group of people who learn from one another. So I happen to be wearing a collar, and I'm Christian, and I'm Episcopalian, but that is not who everybody in this group is, and nor should it be. We're a group of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and have a lot to learn from one another. So hopefully, if you're coming to this book study, you can bring, oh, there's Hillary. Hi, Hillary. Your different perspective. You definitely don't have to be Christian or Jewish to be partaking in this study. So if you are coming from another tradition that's not Jewish, not Christian, and you have spiritual disciplines, we would love to hear from you too. How can your understanding of spiritual discipline enrich and inform the rest of us, and how can our understanding inform yours? So hi. So that's why we're here. So that's just super brief. Your homework is to think about those 3 questions, and I'll probably post a few other things, but we'll really begin to dive deep next week when we start to talk about Sabbath on Tuesday. So tune in at 4 o'clock, and be sure to check back to see what other people are saying, either in this live comment thread or in the picture comment thread. And again, if you are an Instagrammer or a Twitterati, you can check there too, join in those conversations. Thanks so much. Have a great day, and I hope that for those of you who are participating in Lent, that it has begun in a way that is making you feel closer to the divine and to your neighbor. Have a great day, Hive.